I'm Sam Adams, the curator of modern and contemporary art, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program, Enrique Chagoya, Encounter at the Border of Language. Tonight, we celebrate the singular art of Enrique Chagoya and his works in the Allens collection, which are centerpieces of teaching across studio art, art history, Latin American studies, and comparative American studies. We're also celebrating Chagoya's inclusion in a trio of exhibitions honoring a landmark gift of more than 170 works from Dreek and Michael Zarinsky, Oberlin class of 1965 and 64 alumni. These exhibitions span the entire museum and were organized by me and my colleague, Kevin Greenwood, curator of Asian art, with our student assistants, Delisa Lapidus and Joanne Kim. I'd like to acknowledge past curators who stewarded this gift, Denise Berkhofer and Andrea Girotti, and our registrar, Lucille Steiger, who expertly oversaw all arrangements to transport the more than 170 works to Oberlin. Tonight, we welcome back a special guest, the Allens director of 12 years, Andrea Durstein, without whom this historic gift would not have been possible. Thanks to Jill Greenwood for managing tonight's program, and the Allens staff who assisted in making it possible: Katie Solander, Emily French, Jessica Lear, Andre Septavic, Michael Reynolds, Alyssa Traster, Stacy Ross, and student gallery guides Kate Berry, Cal Kane, Stella Gregovich, and Audie Wilson. And an especially heartfelt thank you to our incredible, beloved security staff. Based in Boise, Idaho, the Zarinskys began amassing an international collection years before US museums even began to address global art. They built their collection slowly and intentionally, working with artists, residencies, and small galleries to ensure their purchases directly supported artists. The bulk of the Allens' works by contemporary indigenous artists are from the Zarinskys, as are cherished works in the collection, especially by Asian American and Latin American artists. While narratives of global contemporary art often center on trauma and violence, the Zarinskys' personal experiences of border crossings and unique sense of humor drew them to artists who approach geopolitics with a disarming sense of wit and levity, qualities that Enrique Chagoya's work exemplifies. The artists who the Zarinskys chose to live with and ultimately to give to Oberlin have changed the course of the museum's history and will become cornerstones in the Allens exhibitions and the college's museum-based teaching for generations to come. Tonight, we have the honor of hearing from the internationally acclaimed artist, Enrique Chagoya. Combining images from secular and religious iconographies and popular culture, Chagoya's work addresses colonialism, inequality, and international conflict with a biting sense of humor. Born in Mexico City, Chagoya began making political cartoons for union and student newspapers while studying economics at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. In 1979, he moved to California, first working as an illustrator and graphic designer, then obtaining a BFA in printmaking from the San Francisco Art Institute, followed by an MA and MFA from UC Berkeley. Chagoya is a professor of art practice at Stanford University, where he has taught since 1995. Chagoya's prints, drawings, paintings, and codices in the tradition of satirical political cartoons have brought him international recognition, including a John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship and induction into the National Academy of Design. He has exhibited at the San Jose Museum of Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, among many others. His works are in the permanent collections of the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Allen Memorial Art Museum at Oberlin College. Now, please join me in welcoming Enrique Chagoya to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And it's my pleasure to be here with everybody. I am flattered to be part of the collection, my work, to be part of the collection of this museum. And I guess I'm going to start with a little bit of my background, and I'm going to try to go a little fast because there's a lot to say, a lot of things I would like to talk that I will not have time in 1 hour or so that the lecture goes through. But just a little bit of information to give you a general idea of where my ideas were coming from or are coming from, and how my work developed. So I'm going to start a little bit with my background growing up in Mexico City. All right, so I'm going to start in Mexico City with my parents who influenced my thinking. First with my mom. She was a seamstress. She worked at home doing maquilas for many years. She was a very generous person throughout her life. She had a great sense of justice in general. And the part that was memorable to me, this was 1968. I was a kid. And my mom came from downtown crying, very upset. And this was 1968 during the students' movement. And she witnessed police shooting a teenager. And when I saw her crying, I was crying with her. And till today, I remember clearly that day. She had a great sense of compassion. Eventually, she had other partners working. We were living in an apartment in Mexico City. That's where she was working as a seamstress in her bedroom. And eventually, she got more than one sewing machine, 2 or 3. And she was very generous with the other seamstresses that were working with her. They made parties at the end. And anyway, as I say, I have a lot to say. And I don't want to talk to you about my biography too long. But anyways, that created a great sense of awareness on my side about the world, about injustices or things that will make anybody upset. So my mom created that seed in me. The other person is my dad. My dad was a firefighter, and he was also an artist. He studied graphic design, but he didn't make a living as an artist. Used to make a living. He did different arts. He was a baker in a Mexican panaderia for a while. He made amazing bread at home. He was a great, not only a great baker, but also a great cook. So anyway, because of that, I mean, he got really, really buff. That's my dad. It's like Superman. And again, I used to ask him to draw things for me when I was a kid, to draw a little elephant, an airplane, whatever, until he was fed up with me asking too much drawings from him. So he taught me how to do it myself. And that was the best thing he did for me, because he taught me how to do sketching, drawings when I was about 7 years old, and eventually color theory. The best thing he did later is he took me to his office. Eventually, he got a job in the central bank, catching con artists who were doing forgeries of money bills. So his office was a criminology office within the bank. It was a museum of forgeries, had the plates and the money bills. And there were forgeries of not only Mexican pesos, there were dollar bills, there were francs at the time from France. There was Venezuelan bolivars, Cuban pesos, and so on. I was so amazed of that gallery of forgeries that left a big impression on me. And you will see later in my slideshow all the look-alike things I love to do. Another influence of my work was my nanny. I had a Nahua indigenous nanny that I love. And since my mom was working, my dad was working, I spent a lot of my childhood with her. She used to talk to me in her indigenous, it was Masawa, which is part of the different groups in the Nahua groups. And I just grew up loving her. She was great. And my parents used to take us to ancient ruins like Teotihuacan. And that was a place that I connected indigenous cultures also with my childhood. And today I have these memories of my parents at home. This is a photography. It's a three-dimensional photography, a craft that is from Mexico City. It's pretty hard to find any of these. I was lucky to find one of the last artists who were doing that, hand-painted a black and white photograph, then making a sculpture of the rest of the body and assembling it together. And it's just an artwork that is unfortunately pretty much gone. I would be lucky to find another artist who does this in Mexico City. Anyway, so the rest was also my times as an activist from high school to the School of Economics. These are two of my best friends. One of them, they're two anthropologists, and I was in the school studying political economy at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. And so with these friends, we used to go to demonstrations all the time. And I don't know if any of you saw the movie Roma. You know, that scene where there is a student demonstration, where people are running for their lives, they're fighting paramilitary groups. That was the demonstration that shaped my life too. I was there. I almost got killed with these friends. We were lucky to run away with our lives. But the paramilitary groups, in the movie, you see them fighting with sticks to the students and with guns, shooting people after, running after them in stores or places. They used to kill them also in the ambulances. And in my case, I was confronted by paramilitary groups, not with just a regular pipe, but with bamboo sticks, with knives at the end of the bamboo stick. And I was really lucky to really be able to run away from that. There was about 70 people who got killed in that demonstration. And that was the first demonstration done after 1968 massacre, right before the Olympic Games in Mexico. So from 68 to 71, there was no demonstrations, they were forbidden. And so we were fighting for, you know, democratic liberties, for having an influence in our curriculum at school, and many other demands, working with farm workers and industrial workers in different strikes. So it was a big, big movement. But the fact that I almost lost my life there, and the political studies I was doing at the same time at the university, made a whole different perspective of the world for me. And eventually I moved to Berkeley. So I went from being a subversive artist in Mexico City, as was said, I was doing a lot of cartooning in Mexico City for union newspapers and student newspapers. Here is I'm speaking at UC Berkeley. I taught for a year at UC Berkeley, and right after, the university almost shut down the art department for lack of money. It was an economic crisis right in the early 90s. So I'm speaking here in support of keeping the art department alive, with some of my students in the background. Anyway, so I'm gonna move on to the artwork now. So when I moved here to the Bay Area, I changed careers. I went from being more like an economist, because I worked also 2 years in the countryside as an economist, organizing co-ops for low-income farm workers. That's where I met my first wife, an American who was living there. And unfortunately, after the 2 years, she got sick from parasites. And unfortunately, she could not live in Mexico. She almost died from it. So then we moved here together. And so I say that I did not immigrate to this country. I was imported by my first wife, and happily. Anyway, I married again to an artist later. But to make the story short, my background in politics in Mexico and on cartooning came back during a national campaign against intervention in Central America that Lucy Lippard, these are critics from New York, organized with poets from El Salvador back in 1984. That was my last year of my undergrad school at the San Francisco Art Institute. So I did this for a local chapter of the Artist Call Against Intervention in Central America. That was 1983, 1984, when Ronald Reagan was supporting a paramilitary group attacking the Sandinista revolution at the time. At the time, the Sandinista revolution was very hopeful. Unlike today, things change, you know, but at the time, it was a hopeful moment. So I went to Nicaragua. I organized solidarity committees in the Bay Area. So making this thing made me feel that this was not art. This was just an editorial cartoon. And I was never lucky to be invited to be the cartoonist for a big newspaper or anything. I would love to be like in one of those, but never happened. So I decided to make a big drawing like this. So the first time we did it in that exhibition, it got vandalized. It got torn on both sides of the drawing. It's really hard to see in the slide. So I decided to make my first kind of forgery of myself, my own work. So I find a way to retrace the original drawing, including the erasing marks that I did in the original, which were kind of mistakes, quote unquote mistakes. So I repeated all of that. And this second version is at the San Jose Museum permanent collection, and it's up in an exhibition that's going to be there for about 2 years now. After that, I did a whole series of charcoal drawings, the same size. They're all about 80 inches by 80 inches. And this one is about displacement of people from their land. It could be Native Americans who were displaced from their land. It could be about people who didn't immigrate to this country, like the early Mexicans who used to live in the Southwest since the colonial times when the New Spain viceroyalty was created. And many Mexicans stayed there after the independence of Mexico and after the US-Mexican War, as you might recall, the border shifted south. And those Mexicans stay in the US. They didn't come to the US. They were in the land that was from ancestral times. Some of them were mixed with indigenous backgrounds. So those are the early Mexicans. They didn't come here. I would say the same thing applies to African Americans who were forced to come to this country. They did not immigrate to this country, as the ones who are descended from slaves as well. And the same with Puerto Ricans, maybe Hawaiians, I'm sure. So all of these things raise a lot of questions in contemporary politics about immigration, because it has a lot to do with displacement of land and also self-entitlements. And to my concept, sometimes I question who were the first, if people call them today illegal aliens, and which is a term I dislike completely. I will call people more undocumented immigrants. The first undocumented immigrants in our history, in the history of this country, were the Spaniards, the conquistadors, who were all the way up to Chesapeake Bay in the Northeast, to Florida, all the way to California, etc. And then the Pilgrims, and then the subsequent waves of Europeans who came with no passport and acting against the law of the land of hundreds of Native American nations. If you call that undocumented immigrants, you will be right. And the current undocumented immigrants should be honored as the new Americans, in my perspective. So this is all what I like to question, sometimes with a little bit of humor. In this case, it's kind of like a Mickey Mouse hound. It's called When Paradise Arrived. It's hard to see here in the slide, but in the middle of the finger here, when you see the drawing in person, it reads English only. So, and this is my portrait of the economy, Wall Street, maybe. And it's really hard to see some little details like here. And here, I love to make fun of art talk. I hope you could read the art talk. When we study economics, we were taught to write in 4 rules that are very simple, and I pass them to all of you. If you have to write any essays, they're very easy, simple to remember, but hard to. So you have to be clear, precise, concise, and profound. And sometimes I find that art talk and art theory is exactly the opposite. And it gets me very frustrated, so I decided to pick on art theory sometimes to make fun of it. I studied quite a bit of art theory because I really love theories, all kinds of theories. So I study a lot of constructivism and life and art getting together and so on. But it's still, I can't escape my sense of humor with this. So this is another detail. That one maybe, should I say? No, it's gonna, well, you can imagine. F off. And now recently, because there's a lot of bigotry going on around, especially in places like Florida or other places, I decided to have this version of a square Mickey Mouse since Disney was canceled by DeSantis in Florida. So this is kind of like a image of a macho Mickey Mouse that might be in the head of the governor. Liberty Club, which tends to get actually violent, so the wave gets a little intense from that perspective. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about another appropriation. I like to do it. Okay, the terms of reverse anthropology something comes together with my terms of reverse modernism, and I don't believe those terms myself. Okay, so it's not like any serious theory I have about reverse anthropology or reverse modernism. It's a satire. It's a satirical statement. And what I learned is how condescending some European versions of Native Americans were. And Native Americans had very complex cultures that sometimes get very reduced by, well, reductionist versions of their cultures, either, like the Aztecs were doing sacrificial rituals all the time, or cannibalism and so on, and usually portray indigenous people as somebody who was asking to be civilized, begging to be civilized because they were savages, violent. So in this case, this is a painting by a German artist, Karl Weimer, whose name was translated to Charles Weimer. Is the abduction of Daniel's Boone daughter by the Indians. That's the original title from his painting. So I decided to do an appropriation of the stereotype and work with a new stereotype. And I have done more than one version of this drawing. So it's stereotypes over stereotypes. I did a print, a lithograph later, becoming more like a Pan-American indigenous cultures again, with the same idea. And I think I'm repeating a slide. I shouldn't go there now, but I don't know why it's there. Oh, this thing. Oh. Yeah, it's not. All right, so I'm going to start with some of my work. Somehow things got a little scrambled when I sent my email from one system to another system online. But I decided to do appropriations of etchings by Goya from the disasters of war. So I did a whole series. And I should have started with this. This was the very first look-alike print I did after Goya. Back when I was still a student at the San Francisco Art Institute, and it's called Contra el Bien General, or Against the Common Good. And the former president, Ronald Reagan, when he was supporting the terrorist group, the Contras in Central America, he declared himself a Contra. And the original title of Goya's etching is Contra el Bien General, Against the Common Good, which was perfect. So I didn't have to do anything. I studied the original Goya's etchings in my class of printmaking, history of printmaking. My teacher was the curator of the print collection at the Achenbach collection, Robert Johnson, and he was pulling original prints from many artists, including Goya's, and I fell in love with Goya. So I was studying etching, so I took my measuring tape, took measurements of the plate, the paper, etc., and then I went to do my own version, and I was very happy with it. So I did more versions of that. That's another scene. This is kind of like a yin and yang. And this is, I don't know if you remember going to if any of you went to Disney World, you read Welcome to the Happiest Place on Earth. And I decided to put that next to the unhappiest place on Earth, which is war, in my opinion. So it's kind of like a yin and yang. And also there is a gas mask. Here, Disney designed a gas mask. If you go online, you look for Disney gas mask, and you will see something very, very alike. In this slide, I decided to put some rubber stamps because Franco, you know, the fascist dictator in Spain, decided to put his stamp on Goya's prints in the collection of El Prado and other place. So it was to me a contradiction of Goya's spirit, which was the opposite of being a fascist. So I decided to make my own rubber stamps. In this case, the television I did as a rubber stamp. You cannot read it here, but it reads, "This is not a test." Right. So then I have to make a disclaimer about Goya. I have shown, or some museums show my work, my Goya prints together with Goya's prints, and I feel embarrassed because I cannot compete. I cannot compete with Goya. And although I have to say, I have a revelation when I was trying to imitate his lines. I have to shake my hand to make them look alike. My lines were too clean compared to his original ones. So I realized that he had a shaky hand when he was doing those etchings. So when I realized that, I felt like Goya was like communicating with me, like I felt like little goosebumps, and I say, I'm sorry. So I have to make a disclaimer. So I decided to make a self-portrait like Goya, but with his hat way too big, and his shoe is too big for me too. So that's on the rubber stamp. But I have done quite a bit of his prints. My favorite one is perhaps The Sleep of Reason, produces monsters. In the original print by Goya, the monsters are bats, you know, and owls, which by today's standards, they are not scary, they are not and they're endangered species. The owls are endangered, the bats are endangered, they're good for agriculture. And cats, I love cats, I have cats. So I decided to replace those owls and bats by actual horror elements like military airplanes, military aircraft, Mohawk missiles, stealth bombers, and so on. I did a second version of that with actually one of my cats, with Lily. And here is another Sleep of Reason produces monsters. Very often I try to do these scary images, trying to think I could exorcise that. In a way, that's not different than the painting it's in the exhibition right now. It's a very sad painting about the Holocaust, about a flood, about the Bible, about the present, about the past. All these things keep threatening us, unfortunately. So a lot of these things, I wish they were gone. And I hope this still might work as an exercise to make them go away. But I think by just playing with humor, at least trying to show how, can I put it, the irrational side when you get a powerless character confronted by a hyper-powerful figure of authority. It's just like the yin and yang sometimes. And I'm lucky if I could keep some of the humor behind some of these works. But I moved to different realms besides, in this case, how the actual police got militarized since decades ago, not just today, but also to the economic inequality and art. And like people who, there are people who deal with art, like art dealers, collectors who love art. And they're the other side of people who just invest for profit. And very often for money laundering reasons. So there's all these connections. I don't generalize everything. It's just certain parts of the economy, certain parts of the population tend to take advantage of the system. So in this case, it's people who are hiding Damien Hirst, that paintings, which he doesn't even touch, by the way. Somebody else paints them, which fine with me. And this is my version of former President Obama. Not escaparás, you will not escape. It's really hard to see the little KKK featherless chicken on the bottom. I did this in 2011, and it was already a backlash against President Obama for being the first African-American president in history. So it was like basically something that evolved until what we have today. That backlash got even worse in the future decades, all the way to contemporary times. These are more recent. These are like from about 2 years ago with conspiracy theories. Like this character portraying the QAnon character with the hat. And another one, Que Pico de Oro, what a golden beak. And that's the original title of that. And so like a Donald Duck KKK character on the bottom. But Goya has been a major inspiration for me. This is from a different series from the Proverbs or Proverbios. And this is something I did around the Persian Gulf War with petroleum and oil, and you have like a little bloody oil well on the bottom. If this one I did at RISD some time ago. And it's called People in Sacks, the original title. And sometimes just an issue of, to show how disenfranchised we feel against powers that are beyond the individual. So this is a good example for me of how to implement that. The same thing with war and the weight of war that we all have to carry, like in this case, an upside down Abrams tank. And again, the waves of immigration, which I mentioned my perspective on that recently. So in this case, it becomes a little bit surreal. And also, when you think about the border right now and immigrants at the border, I was just talking to somebody. There is no crisis at the border. There's a crisis at the border, but there is no security crisis at the border. There is a humanitarian crisis at the border that you cannot fix with guns. It's a humanitarian crisis that is international. People from all over the world are trying to move to different countries, not only to this country, to Europe, or from South America back to Argentina or to Mexico, etc. It's a worldwide issue, and it's not a security problem unless you make it a security problem. And I wish there could be more collaboration internationally to resolve the problem, because there is not enough resources for one country to accept everybody, but there could be resources all over the world to help everybody. But that's just my wishful thinking as an artist. In the meantime, to me, they become kind of like ghostly characters in a Goya print. But anyways, I'm gonna move to other issues. I'm gonna take you to my studio here, and from there, I'm gonna take you to a place where I work in Oakland at Magnolia Editions. So, oh, that's perfect. So in Oakland, I work with Aldo Farnsworth, making a lot of my codices lately. Here we are during COVID. That's Aldo behind me, and we used like kids playing with images, and eventually we get them printed. A lot of artists work at Magnolia, by the way. It's a place where they keep inventing new forms of printing, including printing with graphite. Aldo found a way that he could reproduce a drawing with graphite. And if you get a big file from a Da Vinci and find vintage paper, he can do it. So when I talked to Aldo about doing some kind of forgeries, he loved it. So I'm going to show you some of that. But anyways, many artists work there, among other people, like a very good friend, Hang Liu, who was an amazing artist. This is her just about 2 months before her major retrospective at the Smithsonian. And unfortunately, she passed away before the opening. She was already sick here with pancreatic cancer. But these are the kind of like local family in the Bay Area where we work. So at Magnolia, I decided to make my quote unquote forgery of this print. Yet another European artist portraying indigenous cultures as savages and as primitives. This is Theodore Debris, who made these illustrations of Brazilian cannibal women. And it was commissioned by the Spanish crown. So the originals, even though he's Belgium or was Belgium, the print is in Spanish. And in the top say, and the women kept the tribe. And I decided to make my own version of this, sort of my reverse anthropology version. And this is called The President's Xenophobic Nightmare in a Foreign Language. And the foreign language is Russian. So in Russian, on the top, it reads, I want to wake up in this moment. And I put the border patrol on the right corner and Columbus on the left. Here you cannot see it. Somehow the slide got smaller. But on the top, I say, and the women kept the tribe. So I put all the stereotypes, possible ethnic stereotypes everywhere: Mexicans, Muslims, Africans, Maya, indigenous, and so on. Those are the babies. Well, so let's go to Monet lookalikes. So this was the first lookalike we did, Aldo and myself at Magnolia Editions. We changed everything, the text. So it reads here it says the federal bailout note. And this was at the time the share of debt per household, $60,000. And the public debt at the time was $11 trillion. Instead of $1, we put one recession. And I told Aldo, but you know, the minute we printed this is dated. The numbers are changing every second. So we decided to make an electronic version of it. So, and we changed even more the text. Instead of United States of America, we put the Untied States of America. And the same information. And we didn't stop there. We decided to make $1 billion bill. So this is the newest one. And we changed the words again. This is Federal Economic Privilege Note. The Unequal States of America, $1 billion. And I'm gonna show you a little details. How many billionaires per USA population are? 540. And same thing here, or billionaires per capita. I wonder if I show also the offshore tax-free. I cannot even imagine that number 10 at the 9th power. try to imagine the numbers there. I think my next money bill is going to be $1 trillion bill. It's going to be like a codex, one of my. So anyway, but here is the back. We also work on the back. And now I'm going to move, speaking of codices, to a codex I have done a lot of codices like this one. And this is a self-portrait as my DNA. And it's kind of a challenge because some people might get a little offended. Why are you representing yourself, in different genders, different ethnicities? And it's because that's my genes. So I have this mix. I have 51% Native American, I have 38% Basque, and the other 11%, I'm Northern African. I have Jewish Ashkenazi, Arab, I'm Southern Asian, Eastern Asian, and a tiny bit of Northern European. So my ancestors were very promiscuous, I guess. They love to mix with everybody. But the thing is, I end up with their genes in my blood. And what I feel puzzled or happy and puzzled is that these genes get along inside of my blood, in me. Otherwise, I will be dead. I'll get cancer or something when your genes don't get along with each other. Even though I have like enemy tribes, Spanish against the Spaniards, Jewish, Arab, Eastern Asian, Southern Asian. I don't know. Humanity has this history of being the worst enemy of itself. So I wonder, this is the puzzle I have, if we as a species are the same species, just in different types of skin and shapes and tones, but the same species at the end, and we belong to an organism, and each one of us might be like a genetic element of some kind, of a different tribe, but in the same organism, why don't we get along with each other? Because otherwise, we're just going to create our own cancer, which is maybe happening. But that's, for me, the happy side, that all of us, I'm sure any one of us has a mix of genes. Even within the same ethnicity, you might have enemy tribes. It could be Ukrainian and Russian, or different African groups, or different Native American groups, or different Hawaiian groups that were trying to kill each other, but in our blood, they live happily. So this is my statement in that regard, because my ancestors had come in all genders, all colors, and I'm very happy they live within me. So I have done many more of these, but you don't have to see the same idea too many times. Anyway, that was published at Magnolia Editions as well. This is where we do some of the codices. That's the handmade paper from Mexico. It's an indigenous paper. It's called amate. And this was the first codex we did, or actually the second, because there was an exhibition in Mexico City to celebrate the 500th anniversary, or not celebrate, to remember the 500th anniversary of the conquest of Mexico City. That happened in 1521. And in 2021, there was an exhibition at the National Museum of Art in Mexico City, and they wanted my very first codex, which was this one, Tales of the Conquest, which I did in 1992. And that is in the collection of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And they wouldn't like to lend that work to the exhibition in Mexico City. So I went to Magnolia, and we said, let's make a look-alike. And Magnolia did exactly the same. It looks just the same. We sent it to Mexico City, and after that, we decided to keep going with more codices. So this is now in the collection of Mexico City National Museum of Art, by the way. And it's a facsimile, but doesn't look like a facsimile because the way we did it. But also this is important because this is where I did a book that is in the collection in the museum here, the Codex Spangliensis, which I did in collaboration with Felicia Rice. who was a bookmaker, and Guillermo Gomez Peña, who lent us his texts from his performances for the book. And then I did all of that. So you could see another version of this, but bigger in the Codex Spangliensis, which is upstairs in the library for you to see later. Anyway, so this one is called El Popol Vuh de la Abuelita de la Huizote, or the People's Book of King Ahuizote's Granny. King Ahuizote was an Aztec king who expanded the Aztec Empire, but I think the granny was more important. So I decided to portray the granny as a little girl on the right, finding a Nazi character. It's really hard to see here. It got a little fuzzy, the projection, but anyway, and right next to her is King Nezahualcóyotl. I have a close-up. Great. Here we can see it. So this is a 4-year-old Mayan girl that I found in a photograph. So I made my own version of her. And I decided to give her the body of Captain America. But in this case, I changed the colors for the Mexican flag. So she's Capitana Mexico, maybe. But she's fighting this white supremacist, with a Nazi character. And then right behind her is King Nezahualcóyotl. This is a very important king in Aztec history. He's a king, and I'm sure you have not heard this anywhere. He's a king who opposed human sacrifice. He never committed human sacrifices, was a poet, an architect, and a philosopher. And as a philosopher, he had an idea of God or goddess that nobody has ever seen, and therefore made a pyramid dedicated to the unseen God, empty, with nothing to worship. It was just an idea. And that's King Nezahualcóyotl. He organized festivals of poetry, and there are about 30 poems known of him that have been published in some nice books. Anyway, so that's him having a fight with some Donald character here. I did that square Donald figure as a super Donald. And right next to that, I did a Mayan Batman with the actual Batman confronting each other on the left. So this is the other half of the same book. And this is like a three-dimensional texture. It was printed super thick. It's not flat. And the pages were trimmed to resemble the original codex, which is Codex Madrid, one of the 4 Mayan books in the book. There's the Codex Madrid, the Codex Dresden in Germany, the Codex Paris, and the Codex Mexico City. So I have worked with some of them. But anyway, so this is the other end. I decided, everybody who might have guns or whatever, from their guns, they're going to be shooting flowers only. And here is Superman in Spanish saying, "Cálmate, Clark Kent, te protegeré." Calm down, Clark, I will protect you. And Clark Kent is saying, "No, not even you, Superman, could protect me from my enemy." But it goes all together with the Border Patrol character from a comic book that I had. It's called the Border Patrol, with characters there. I added other elements. Anyways, my books don't have a specific narrative. They are not necessarily linear, even though you might read them from right to left or left to right. And this one is called Procession, Tales of the Post-Conquest, also from 2021. And 2021 is important for books in Mexico because during the conquest of Mexico, King Nezahualcóyotl, the king I just showed you, created the biggest library in the continent. It had thousands of books on different subjects: medicinal, herboriary medicine, astronomy, astrology. They have a more precise calendar than the Europeans at the time, more than the Gregorian calendar that was developed a few decades after the conquest. And who knows how they did their calculations. There's only one single Aztec pre-Hispanic book, one single book in the Biblioteca Nacional in Paris, the Codex Borbonicus. So from the Codex Borbonicus, I used the snake. It's the feather snake or Quetzalcoatl. Anyways, this library was in the kingdom of Texcoco that was ruled by King Nezahualcóyotl that was burned to ashes. All the books in that library were burned. There was a mass suicide of the indigenous people that witnessed the destruction. So that history influenced me also to make more books. So I decided to use the same paper and with the similar language, visual language of elements, I make maybe books that are non-phonetic. It will be very hard for me to explain my own books with words because it's more emotional and more about what do you see. I still making fun of art talk. So if the slide were a little more clear, I probably would be able to read it to you, but there is nothing but just quotes from October magazine, from early art forums, things like that. And I have done other codices and also appropriating more European art. And this one is from a series of multiple engravings celebrating the triumph of Emperor Maximilian I in Austria in 1521. This was done by Hans Burgmeier. And I made my own version of The Land of the Dead. The Land of the Dead with different indigenous characters here. And also, in the Land of the Dead, your gold is useless. So people, it's about gold as well, about wealth that we don't take with us. And also about the humanity behind the stereotypes. And that's why I put this kind of skinless stereotype. I have done that before with Mexican stereotypes, but in this case, I decided to expand it. So just to show that underneath the skin, all of us are flesh and bones in the same way. And in the Land of the Dead, we are pretty much the same. I'm not religious myself, but I love the mythology of life and death in pre-Columbian mythology. In pre-Columbian mythology, life was a dream. And when you die, you woke up. You wake up, and your life begins as a dead person. So there's always celebrations for that. So it's kind of like Day of the Dead, but every day. And so the Spanish, for instance, the Spanish version of Dead is more like the Dance Macabre, which is democratic, takes the king or the queen, the rich, the poor, etc. And there's a writer, Calderón de la Barca, that says, life is a dream, and dreams, only dreams are. It's a beautiful statement too, but they're so different than life is a dream, and then you wake up from the pre-Columbian. So between those two elements, sometimes I make images like this one. And one of my most recent books is based on the Mayan Codex in Mexico City, which is torn apart. So this is called the Codex City of Mirrors. And this is from 2023. We're still working on the final edition. And it's the collision of cultures, pre-Columbian and European in one place. And I was just talking to Sam not too long ago about two exhibitions I saw. I don't know if ever you saw them at the Metropolitan Museum, painted in Mexico, colonial paintings, and also the golden empires from South America and Mexico, the indigenous cultures. Both were rich in treasures. The sort of like Renaissance paintings painted by indigenous people, anonymous, and then incredible wonders from Peru, actual codices from Mexico, and incredible little sculptures in gold that were just hard to describe. When I saw those two exhibitions, next to each other, it blew my mind to see how violent the change was. Within 10, 20 years, indigenous people were moving from the treasures they were doing right before the Europeans arrived to Baroque paintings, which are beautiful too, but you could imagine how violent the transformation was between those places. Eventually, indigenous people were forced to paint catechisms. So this is from an indigenous catechism painted after the conquest. And I love the original style of the codex because it's very different than any Mayan or Aztec or even the influence that the Spaniards had with Renaissance prints on the Aztec artists that painted other paintings later. So in this case, everything reads backwards. This is Codex Itereville, means liberty backwards, and has a lot of statements that are hard to read. But I remember the one on the bottom, and it says, "Are you lost? Don't follow me. I am lost too." That's what you will read from right to left. And I'm gonna end very soon with border walls. To me, the walls that are harder to cross are the invisible, not the visible walls. The walls between social classes, between cultures, between religions, you name it. They are invisible, but they're really hard to cross. And when you cross them, that you realize that people in both sides are very much the same. So in this case, I put around all this group of characters, indigenous drawings on the background in red and black, and stereotypes of different cultures, including the stereotypes of Europeans on the top. So I did another border wall. And so this was wild little things that shine obstinately. And these are pictures from people from the dreamers from Dhaka, undocumented workers. Even a woman who worked for Donald Trump hotels, the one in the far right, this one here. And she was undocumented. So these are close-ups. This is like a very cakey painting, like like an 1/8 of an inch thick paint on the faces. Here they are. Yeah, beyond walls. That was the part that he was not able to read, but. And my 7 deadly sins. Now, these are inspired by James Ensor. So this one is called Pride with a Snow White. Remember that, who's the most beautiful one. And this is really, really thick paint as well. So I made this in 2020. This is Greed. This is Slut. This is Anger. All of my versions have a skull somewhere. In this case, the skull is in the eye of the dog. This one is called Envy. And these are also avatars. This one is called Lust. I didn't make this image. This is by James Ensor originally. I just changed the faces. I put avatars for China, Russia, and the other character, Richie Rich. I don't even need to mention who's that. And the last of the 7 deadly sins, gluttony. And it's hard to see here, but there is a crucifix on the top with the blood of Christ, and the sheep are drinking from the blood. And that's a metaphor for, the first communion. The blood of Christ is represented by the wine, and the flesh is represented by the bread. So I decided to put that as kind of unconscious message to say this is a religious practice here of the Aztecs at the same time. So they are celebrating their first communion here with flesh and blood of some funny characters. These are some of my paintings. Another version of the tension at the border of language. I put an Aztec pyramid in the background, it's hard to see. The end of all the stereotypes is called Aliens, this painting. Another version of the Codex Iterbil. Here it's easier to see, to read some of the words backwards. Some of them are in Spanish, some of them say like on the upper right, I love you, war, and then fraternity, I don't know, all these different words. A collaboration I did with my wife. My wife's an amazing painter, Cara Maria, and she painted the letters, this amazing painting letters, and painted my version of my Batman logo that are really, really sharp. I made this page from Border Patrol comic. And again, when you leave what makes a stereotype, leave that in the picture, you end up with very superficial elements like the clothing here. You get rid of the face and there is nobody there. So we decided to define this stereotype. So in the bottom, it's hard to read here, but originally this stereotype was saying we are all Americans, and the Border Patrol was not believing it. Finally, I'm going to end my slideshow with this was my latest painting. I decided to change the Capitana Mexico for actually Captain America. And because it's more like what's happening to all of us here, all of us who live here. I became American decades ago, so I'm happy to be here and as worried as everybody with the situation the country is going to. But here I decided to have another version of this. It's called Encounter at the Border of Language. Again, with images from the indigenous catechism, sort of like a protective spirit. Mayan girl with an Aztec headdress, but in blue, dressed as Capital America, as a face of the new America that is composed by many cultures, not only one. And then a bigot character with a symbol of a supremacist group on the arm. And it's in the Grand Canyon, clearly, but it's sort of like an imaginary coalition that is taking place at monumental proportions. So my only hope for all of this is my last print I did, which is a bumper sticker with 2025. And if I send a file to Jill, it's printable. You could do bumper stickers. You could do a T-shirt, whatever. If you find a place where print all the stickers, you could just get that file. It's copyrighted by me, but just because I don't want people to sell it, they are free, so anybody could copy them. They just cannot sell them. So if you go to a store, just make sure they don't keep the file. You keep it for yourself. All right. Anyway, so that's it for my talk. Thank you so much for listening to such a long talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.